Namaste, friends. This is part 3 of my conversation with Rajiv Malhotra on his latest book, A Real Bombshell. The title of the book is Artificial Intelligence and the Future of Power, 5 Battlegrounds. So, Rajiv, at the end of second episode, I had told you that my next question will be, what exactly triggered this interest in you? Because you were into a whole range of other areas and you have taken everybody by surprise by going back to the field that you left behind many years ago. This was your professional expertise,
Right.
right? Artificial intelligence, computers, and all the rest. So, what made you go back? What triggered this
So,
interest?
that's a good question. So, sometimes a book comes about when multiple things that you're pursuing all come together. So, at a philosophical level, I mean, this book has a lot of deep philosophy also, implications, which I'm going to write about in more books in details. At a philosophical level, I've always wondered, is the cosmos an algorithm or is it a being? Algorithm would mean that it is following some mechanical laws, like laws of physics are very mechanical, the way the tides are, the way the eclipses are, all the reason we are able to make machinery and have airplanes and all because it's predictable behavior. Nature behaves in a very predictable manner. There's a large part, that is why there is physics, because there is predictability of behavior. So how far can that pursuit go? How far can science keep discovering that nature is more and more algorithms, more and more clever algorithms? I've always felt that kind of a quest in me. And then there is the spiritual side in me. The first is the scientist in me wants to understand algorithms of nature. And the second is the spiritualist in me wants to understand nature as being, as an actual being, conscious being. So this business of being versus algorithm. In fact, one of the part one of the book is called Algorithm versus Being, because it's an exploration to see is the algorithm getting ahead. AI is making the algorithm ahead, more and more smart and more powerful over our lives. And the on the other hand, the consciousness movement, the yoga movement, the movement of meditation and people going inside their adhyatma, that is making us more and more connected with being. So there seems to be a contest between the algorithm advancing and the being advancing. And if the algorithm were to win, then what happens to the being? Then are we just becoming more and more mechanized? And that would be the case if AI wins too much. And then the people, a few haves who own all this AI, will become the titans, the giants who control everything, and the beingness in all of us will be kind of subdued, maybe even become like slaves. On the other hand, if we disown this whole algorithm side and we just go with beings as a being, our tradition, the Vedic tradition, says that the being is all powerful. The being can have all these powers. We don't need machines and pushing buttons to get all these kind of powers. The rishis had these powers without silicon planted in them, without some kind of a machine or a computer giving them these powers. They could see, they had not only cognition, but future, past, and all the things that they could do, the yogic powers. So the power that algorithm becoming smarter and smarter through AI is one, and the power of being becoming enhanced, consciousness being raised is another. So this algorithm versus being has been part of my life all through. I've been a philosophical level. Now, in my private life, I was into the primacy of consciousness, that kind of philosophy, pursuing that very seriously all my life. And in my professional life, it was more like the algorithm, even as an IT person, trying to do things with those kind of machines better and better and make money. And so when I left all that, some 26, 27 years ago, and pursued a career more as a scholar, giving back to society and writing about humanities and social sciences.
And civilizational issues.
Right.
And invariably, you went to learn from and exchange ideas with the spiritual gurus. You've been in close contact with the best of them and not the so good ones. You also tried to figure out if RSS and other Hindu organizations could get engaged and
Right.
involved. So you've always tried to reach out to all these multiple outfits who claim to be involved with civilizational
Right.
renaissance, or the whole idea of Hindu Rashtra and the glory of
Right.
Bharatvarsh. Uh, did you with this also explore whether they were capable of understanding and tuning into these concerns?
Quite frankly, I'm disappointed with RSS. I'm disappointed with the spiritual gurus. I'm disappointed with the ruling elite in government. I'm disappointed with the corporate because they should have some ethics. I'm certainly disappointed with the media. And I'm also disappointed with the Hindu activists because they haven't figured this out. They haven't wanted to learn enough about this. And I will say you are the first person I'm opening up this with, the first person who's not a techie expert, who's not a subject matter expert in AI, because I decided that the first month I will have discussions only with subject matter experts and people from defense and industry and academia and so on to establish the credentials and the solid nature of the book on a factual basis. And that has already been achieved because this book is being well received, a lot of traction. I'm getting calls every day. People who are subject matter experts want to get into this area. But then I figured that with that as a foundation, I want to get into the people who speak from the humanities and social sciences, who talk about public policy, who talk about, what's happening to our society. And I must say that I decided you're the right person to discuss this with. So since we're having a very open conversation, and your question is a very straightforward, blunt question on what do I think of all the different leaders of Indian society, I have to say I'm very disappointed by them. So we can go through them one by one. I've tried to work very hard, very close with RSS people, and on a personal level, I really respect them. I think they're good human beings. They have good character. They're not some, cunning people or people trying to deceive or any of that. They're good people on a personal level. But as an organization and as an institution, I think they're very obsolete. They have not caught on with the latest trends in the world, and their management style is to kind of close ranks. So when an outsider like me brings some knowledge that they don't have, they are interested, but they'll bring in one of their guys to pick my brain, figure it out, and then dump me, and then he's supposed to champion it. But they're not able to do it. I mean, you cannot pick a ripe fruit and replace the purpose of the tree, which has roots and which has a whole process to make many more fruits. You need that tree. You cannot just pluck some fruits and eat them and figure we don't need the tree anymore. So so every time I've tried, explaining things, I get a good reception. I get very friendly people, very seriously interested, very respectful, but there is no traction in actually transferring this knowledge in a very serious way to their rank and file, because maybe they feel threatened that an outsider teaching our people will make us, the leaders, obsolete. Maybe the leaders feel vulnerable that if an outsider is allowed to come and encouraged to teach all these people, then what will they think of their own leaders? So maybe they're insecure.
Other than insecurity with you, I think it's also a serious problem of intellectual decision.
Okay, so let's come to that.
RSS has been very suspicious of intellectuals because intellectuals aren't so easy to discipline.
I used to be a consultant one time, going to top corporate people in tech and all that, and helping them do their turnaround. And one of the first things you always ask your client is who are you competing against, and what are your benchmarks? How do you evaluate your success? Because you can't improve unless you know what constitutes success. You must have a clear idea of what your goal is and how do you measure that. So when I've asked this to the RSS people, it seems that their goals are not based on industry benchmarks. Their goals are not based on what a competitor is doing in the same area. Their goal is more to continue what their founder did. Okay, this is our way of life. This is how we've always done. This RSS is like this only. You don't understand, you're an outsider, but this is how we are. Now, if your cricket team is losing, you cannot go on saying that this is how we do our batting, sir. Sir, this is our old way of doing batting. Arey bhai, aap out ho rahe ho and aap haar rahe ho. So you have to change your game. So now they need an influx of outside thinking, and they're not willing to bring in leaders from the outside. They're not willing to even bring in people at the middle level as who are outsiders. They want the Shakha product. So it's all homegrown, inbred, which means the same thinking gets revived and from bottom up. There is something to be said for loyalty to the organization, because people in the Shakhas have worked very hard, and so they are being promoted. Something to be said for that. But they need to know that they are obsolete. They are totally obsolete. So when I ask some people, who would you consider your equivalents in other countries, they had not thought of it. RSS should, in a global era, here is my point. The most important organization in the world that RSS should look up to, look towards as a competitor and say, let's have benchmarks. Let's see what they're doing, what we are doing, and compare. The most important such organization in the world, according to me, is the People's Liberation Army, the PLA. The PLA is a grassroots organization. RSS is a grassroots organization. PLA followed the communist model. RSS followed their idea of Hindutva model. Fine. But PLA is not the government. The Communist Party is the government. People's Liberation Army owns the Communist Party in the sense that RSS owns BJP, similar. So People's Liberation Army runs the army. The actual military army is run by them as one of their subsidiaries. The government of President Xi is reports to the People's Liberation Army. All of their industrialists, all of their academicians. So the People's Liberation Army, if you were to say that RSS is something equivalent to that, building grassroots society, changing the character of people, making them more nationalistic, educating them better. That is what PLA has done, because PLA over the last 40 years has taken a very poor country, very uneducated country, bad ethics, no discipline, bad health, and transformed that society grassroots up. And the Communist Party, which is ruling, is the top-down version, top-down, how to create institutions, create power structures, and implement this through force. And PLA is bottom-up, So the top-down and bottom-up have worked miraculously together. It's the equivalent would be that RSS bottom-up and BJP top-down could be working together in the same way. But the difference is that in their case, the army also reports to them, whereas in India, it's not. And in their case, these big tycoons and industrialists are loyal to the PLA. To the hilt, they're loyal. If they are not, they're pulled back. So the RSS, now imagine an old fuzzy-duzzy PLA, communist, old kind of people are now cutting edge in quantum computing, cutting edge in AI. They have got more solar power technology than anybody else, more drone and robotic technology than anybody else. In semiconductors, they have not caught up with the West, but they want to in a few years, and they probably will. The West is quite concerned about it. So all the building blocks of AI, they're this very old-fashioned, ideologically driven People's Liberation Army. How have they managed to keep their culture of being a communist and being a party, all of that intact, at the same time harness so many amazing things from the outside? How? And what would be the case if RSS, while keeping its Hindu Rashtra intact, that ideology intact?
No, but they've lost that mooring also. They don't talk about the Hindu Rashtra anymore.
Suppose you say, okay, you are that is your foundation, and you're pure, and you're with respect to your past, and you're continuing.
No, we can't. I wish they at least talked about Hindu Rashtra and a roadmap to achieving it, because then that would compel them to face the challenges ahead. They have no roadmap. They've even abandoned it as a slogan.
My concern is that while there may be that issue in their ideological foundation, also fine, that could be you've looked into that. I'm more concerned with, on top of whatever the foundation is, why have they failed to they can't say that BJP is too busy running politics, so they can't understand AI. What is RSS's excuse? Why haven't they been able to do this? Now, when you go to the AI campuses in America, some of those people working in AI are also RSS people. They are, in their personal capacity. I know some of them. Some of the good AI technocrats are also RSS members, but they have not been able to connect it. The message I'm giving is how to connect it with culture, society, civilization, nation building. They are not able to do that. So they lack imagination. So that is to me a sign of mediocrity, because I don't have access to any institution that I can go to and they'll spread my message, or give me funds or give me resources.
But you also have good relations with many of the spiritual gurus who
Yes.
have huge
Yes.
followings. Jaggi Sadhguru, Sri Ravi Shankar, and so
I would say, just without mentioning name, but because it applies to all of them, they've missed the mark on AI. Some of them have gone to World Economic Forum. They've gone to Davos. They've gone to the place in Colorado. They've gone to all these Aspen. They've gone to all these very prestigious top places, because it is fashionable for the liberal West to invite leaders of all metaphysical groups and faiths and all that. So the ones who are very popular, who are internationally known multinational gurus, they are the ones who get invited. And I've seen some of those interviews when somebody talks about AI and spirituality. It's laughable how mediocre the response, and what an amazing opportunity with a huge world-class audience they're not able to get. They have TED Talks and they have all kind of international limelight available to them, but they have not taken the leadership position in this. So I've said to the RSS people, shame on you that you couldn't produce this. I say to the spiritual gurus, shame on you that you couldn't produce this. I'm doing this with my own resources. And even now that I'm doing it, rather than helping me, I mean, I'm having to just get through, knock at doors and go one by one on my own. No help coming from any institution that, this guy is producing something very important. We better pay attention. So that is why I decided I'm going to go public and let the chips fall. And this book may produce some issues now there is some Niti Aayog type people suddenly scrambling in the last few weeks, my publisher sent them a copy of this and wanted them to release it. And they didn't want to release it. They didn't want to release my book. They didn't want to even show up at the launch event. Now they are scared of this, but then they have to deal with it because it's out there. People are going to buy a lot of it. People are going to raise these issues. So when it becomes public debate, no matter what they say about me, the point is these are issues public will debate.
I'm reminded of a Q&A session that Jaggi Sadhguru had in one of the foreign universities, when they raised this question of AI and its subversive potential, what it means for job losses, etc. His response was, now that you were talking about the gurus, his response was, why be afraid of it? Because AI will free the human race of needless drudgery. Right. So we'll all have a lot more time. In some of the European countries, you already have a 4-day week, and there's, all the work life is shrinking, leisure life is supposed to expand, and we'll all have more fun if robots are doing our work. What do you say to that?
So that's a very shallow view, and a lot of these very glib gurus are shallow but they don't want to be probed. The view that if 100 hours were required of human labor, now we're going to require 30 hours. So all the people will have 70 hours free, is a naive assumption that the haves, the people who control the technology, who control the capital, will want everybody to have a leisurely life. What's more likely to happen is you'll need fewer people. The amount with automation making in the last 30-40 years, regular automation of computers, it has not reduced the workload of people. People are working like crazy. I mean, I see my kids, the amount of hours they work is more. So the competition among companies, the competition in capitalist society to drive profits and to reduce expenses means that you're not going to encourage, the work can be done in less time, so you guys sit at home and do gardening and all that. What will happen is that you'll still work as hard and you'll squeeze more profit out of it. The human greed as a scenario driving all of this versus the human generosity and very nice guy and everybody. These are the two scenarios. And maybe the gurus are more into the idealistic scenario of how it ought to be, but forgetting the pragmatic scenario of how it is. How it is versus how it ought to be are very different worlds. I mean, if you were to go with how it ought to be, then Duryodhan shouldn't be doing what he did, and there would have been no Mahabharat. If you are thinking about how it ought to be, Ravan should not be the way he was. Sri Ramachandra was not needed to come down and be an avatar and do all this. So our itihas teaches that life in the world is not how it ought to be, but this is how it is, and that is what the Kurukshetra is like, and that is what the Kshatriya in you have to face.
You tell me that Niti Aayog was very disappointing in its response
Yes.
to your book and to your earlier interactions with them. What about the Ministry of Science and Technology? What about the Prime Minister's office?
I respect the minister. He's very good to me, but no response. I mean, I send them all my press announcements. I sent them PDFs. I said, can I call and have a discussion with you? No response, as if, it's better to sort of avoid me and wish that this whole nuisance would go away. See, I don't want to turn into an Edward Snowden type guy that they think, okay, now this guy is a troublemaker. He's exposed us big time. I don't want to do that. So I also have to be a little careful. I mean, in this book, I've pulled back many things. This is already 500 plus pages. It could have been 2,000 pages, and I'm keeping all those things. I'm keeping my ammunition dry because I'm going to produce many more books, and I'm going to do it gradually. As the traction builds up, there's people like you, there's other people, there are some very important people in powerful places also who are gradually coming on board. As traction builds up and I feel I'm protected, there's other people who are with me, and I need your help in this. I need your help to take it to the right circles. Then I'm also more confident I can share more. And I would really like to get into problem solving mode. Right now I'm into exposing the problem, but I have very good ideas on how to solve this. I have ideas on how we could actually leapfrog ahead. There are some assets that India has that could be used to create a next generation way ahead of other people. But, if I just talk about it, it'll just become talking points for 50 people giving their YouTube talks and doing all these mantrans and all that. I don't want my knowledge to be used in the same way, used and abused in the same way like the previous knowledge, where the idea was the ego wants to grab it and go ahead with it and dump me on the side. I don't want that. I want some collegiality. I want some camaraderie. I want teamwork. I want to build a group that really wants to take these ideas forward as a team. That's what I would like.
Okay, so next step will be, if this book gets the deserved traction, you're going to write about solutions. How do we make up for this lag?
How do we make up for this lag? How do we do it responsibly so that we are not harming the underclass in terms of who are already undereducated and making them even more obsolete, so that they have to wait for a handout and wait for subsidies and all that? But how to incorporate them? How to use India's unique assets. India has some very interesting assets. And so this requires a rethink from government policy. It requires rethink from defense, from industry, academia. It requires, I'm surprised that China a dozen years ago set the public policy that by 2025, one of the top goals of China is that they'll be number one by 2025, number one in the world. And it is loud and clear. Why are we surprised now? It's only because of Doklam and these Himalayan wars that the military people said, you know what, they got these AI technologies on the border, so suddenly we are waking up and saying, Arey bhai, AI bhi kya cheez hoti hai? And so everybody's running around trying to create some AI policies. So this is too little too late. But the same people who are sleeping we can't expect that suddenly they're going to become very smart. The basic thing the government has to think is whether they're willing to bring in people who are not part of their cabal, part of their shakha, part of their, IAS cadre or something like that. Are they willing to work with such people or not? And if they are not, fine. I'm a writer. I'm a happy guy. I'm 70 plus, whatever years I have left, I'll just keep writing, making some controversy, shaking up people. And that's all I'm happy doing that.
You've already explained this metaphor in some ways, but I would like to conclude with this final question. You use this very powerful and very evocative metaphor of the Titanic, from the film Titanic. I got it instantly. And honestly, it sent shivers down my spine. I would like.
Yeah. So you're quick, you're smart. And I wrote about the Titanic in this book. I do want to explain it, but first I'll say that my publisher called me up and said, Rajiv ji, please remove this whole thing about Titanic. So I said, why? Rajiv ji, this is not good because, it really makes us look like, people get scared. So actually, this is how powerful it is. And when he said that, I figured, okay, that means I have to keep it because all the more,
Yes.
it's doing its job. So let me tell the viewers, Titanic was about 100 years ago considered the world's greatest ship ever built, a passenger ship, very solid, 5-star, 7-star luxury liner. The rich and elite, who's who, would travel on this, and invincible, cannot possibly fail, cannot possibly break because it had all the technology. And on its maiden voyage, the very first voyage from England to New York, it sank. Okay, so this is what happened to the Titanic. Now it sank because it hit an iceberg. It hit an iceberg, which is a floating mountain of ice. Only 10% is visible above the water, 90% is below, and you can't see it. And therefore, that huge mountain of ice below the surface, you can't see, and so you can hit it. So the metaphor I have, the comparison I'm making is, artificial intelligence is the iceberg, which is only partly visible above the surface. A large part of artificial intelligence is not visible to ordinary people unless you have a radar, unless you have the ability, the drishti, to look for what is this AI all about, which is what I have done. So since I have that drishti and I have done that research, I understand that AI is not just what's visible above the surface, but there's a large part of it beneath the surface. We better understand it. So because the Titanic captain was sleeping or drunk or couldn't care less, whatever it is, there's a controversy on what happened, but he wasn't paying attention to this, and so the ship hit.
But Rajiv, what it reminded me of is also that scene when, while the ship is sinking, the orchestra keeps
That
playing.
is part of this whole thing. That is part of this whole thing. Very good.
And the government of India seems to be doing exactly that, fiddling with their...
Maaj ho rahi hai. So what has happened is, AI as a iceberg is only partly known and partly visible, and India is the Titanic, which is hitting it.
But it's not the Titanic, because Titanic was cutting edge at that time.
It's a kind of a lower version of a ship. It's a ship like that, and I'll come and discuss later whether it has already hit the Titanic, in which case it's sinking, or whether it's about to hit the Titanic and there's still a chance we can avoid. That we'll discuss in a while. Once the Titanic hit the iceberg, it sank in 2 hours and 40 minutes. It took 2 hours and 40 minutes from the collision till it's sinking. So the life during those 2 hours, 40 minutes is very interesting. That is what's captured in this in the movie. Couples were dancing on the deck. There was a band playing, and they kept playing. They sank when the ship sank. The people on the deck drowned and died, but they were lifeboats. They could have jumped on the lifeboats. Some people were very pragmatic. They jumped on the lifeboat. They're saved. But a whole lot of lifeboats were left empty, unused, because there were people go on living life, right? Life goes on, music playing, dancing. There were people having arguments, which is like Indians fighting each other over little petty thing, and this rural area, this side, by-election. There were people discussing things like how to decorate this, what should be the menu, and water is gathering. Some people fighting each other, some people doing like life as usual. A few people running to save themselves, but a lot of people treating like life as usual. Ho raha hai, chalo, siren baj raha hai, chalo, koi baat nahi. And they all drowned. So this is a very interesting metaphor to describe. There is this issue called artificial intelligence. India is headed towards the collision. The captains are sleeping. The captains of India are sleeping. Where are they? Why don't they have the sonar radar on, watching? And if I'm coming and telling them for the last 5 years, Arey bhaiya, this is what the iceberg looks like, this is what its shape is, they're not interested. So the captains of India are irresponsible and sleeping. And then the average limelight of Indian celebrities and cricket players and movie stars and businessmen and all these people who go around doing their tamasha on social media, they are having a ball. They are just having a good time. And a lot of petty fights and rivalries going on, which are inconsequential, because when the ship is sinking, then all those little details you are talking about make no difference. So this is the metaphor of the Titanic. And, I don't know if it has already hit the iceberg, in which case it's too late, or if it's about to. My hunch is we could still save it, but it'll take urgent action. It'll take dramatic action. It'll take no nonsense action. There is no time for protocol and saying ye insider hai, wo kahan ka hai, usko ye karna hai, usko. All this petty politics I'm going through. Even in writing this book and bringing it out, there are some people who jumped at it and said, this is fantastic. I've read it. I want to be part of it. And these are very serious, senior people. And then there are those who feel कि अच्छा आप तो right wing है या left wing है या क्या wing है या आप हमारे organization में नहीं है उनकी this kind of pettiness. So if this pettiness continues, we will hit the iceberg and we will sink. In order to save ourselves, you got to rise above all this pettiness and the differences and do something very quick. So this is the message. This captures the message.
Well, Rajiv, thank you. I'm really honored that you chose to spend so many hours talking to me and bearing your heart out. I'm truly honored by that. And I promise you, I'll do whatever little I can in my limited capacity, with my limited capacity, to make people aware of the dangers that we are facing. And I look forward to the sequel. I just hope that this catches the kind of attention it deserves. This is truly a very, very important warning bell that you rung, and far more serious than Breaking India 1.0. And I sincerely hope, actually, we haven't even started tackling 1.0 yet. The conversion mafias, for example, are having a field day. The speed of conversions has really shot up in the last decade or so. So clearly, though that book really became epochal and has changed the mindset of so many people, including my own, I must say we haven't yet done enough. Though you can see from social media how influential the narrative that you set into motion has been. There's hardly a conversation on these civilizational issues that doesn't use the phrases that you introduced in your Breaking India 1.0. And I hope that this book, apart from becoming as decisive in changing the political discourse, the public discourse on these issues, actually will somehow shake our rulers into taking note. And I look forward to the follow-up volume where you discuss solutions as well. Thank you so much.
Thank
Raj.
you.
Thank you,
Madhu. This has been a wonderful. Thank you very much, Madhu. Thank you. Thank you for doing a great job pulling this out of me like nobody else could, because I feel very comfortable with you. So when you ask me a question, I give you an answer. So that's been very helpful. Thank you so much. Namaste.